So the idea is, in this talk, I'm going to share some ideas about how we can really address our students' well-being, because I think it's a big issue right now. And it's one that's increasingly being understood, that it's very much linked to students' academic performance as well. We can't just forget about their well-being and just expect them to perform well. These things are linked together, and that's what I want to talk about. And that's why I've called it Teaching the Whole Student. Well, what I want to ask you, so I'm going to start right off by asking you a question, and that is, I would be interested to know, when you first thought to yourselves, I want to be a teacher, I want to teach English, why did you decide to pick teaching as a career? So I'd be really interested to know if you can just put one or two words in the chat box. It could be, the vast amount of money that I knew I was going to earn as a teacher, or it could be something else. It might be travel. So tell me what it was in a couple of words. What was it that made you want to be a teacher? I'd be very interested to find out. Thank you, Laura. So I'd love to see how my teaching impacts my students' daily life. Very nice. Forced to, found I loved it. Loved to be with young people. My English teacher. I was started when you were 13. Wow. Okay. Yeah. Like writing and producing your own material. That's the way to go. You never know, you might become an author. Love for English to stay young. Okay, it's great. That's so nice that you've shared all those. Very interesting. So there have been some surveys as well asking teachers why they became teachers. That's nice, Leonie. I want my kids to have the same global communication opportunity. And there were various answers. So the question was, why did you become a teacher? So some people talked about the long holidays, not many. Some people mentioned job security, not many. A few people mentioned pension, not many. These were the ones that really stood out, because I wanted to work with young people, and I've seen that mentioned now in the chat box, because I wanted to contribute to society, because I loved the subject. And the biggest reason that was given in these various surveys was because I wanted to make a difference to children's lives. And I can see that is coming up in different formats in the chat box. That is the most commonly given reason. So teachers start off as idealists. And just to give you a little reference there, this is an infographic from a Pearson survey that was carried out in 2015. And you can see that 93% of people who answered said they wanted to make a difference to their students' lives, or they thought they'd be good at it. So that's all wonderful. You start off as these tremendous idealists with all these great plans. There you are. I want to make a difference to my students' lives. Sitting on top of that straight away, you have to deal with students' expectations. What are they expecting when they walk into the classroom? Do they want to learn English? Are they just there because their parents have told them they've got to go there? Do they just want to pass the exams and nothing else? So you have to deal with that, your students' expectations. Then, of course, there are your students' parents' expectations. And your students' parents may have very different expectations to yours and to your students. Perhaps they think that you are the one who is going to discover that their children are the most talented, brilliant students around, and that's your job to try and discover that. Perhaps sometimes parents are very supportive, sometimes they're not very supportive. So that's another thing that kind of sits on top of your ideals. And then you have the future employers of your students. So you have to think of that when you teach your students. What are their future employers going to expect them to be able to do? And again, it comes back to qualifications. How can you ensure that your students are employable? And then sitting on top of that, your school. Of course, your school has a certain number of expectations. They may want to see certain exam results achieved. They may have other boxes that you have to tick. And that's all very important too. So you have to bear in mind that. And sitting on top of the school, of course, you've got the government as well. So whatever the local or national education policies are, those all as well affect the difference that you can make to your students' lives. So that already begins to feel like all those ideals are like feeling a bit squished. And then, of course, what happened 18 months ago, just when life was, already quite challenging, bam, lockdown. And that is really tough. I mean, I think we've all had huge challenges in the last 18 months. It's been tough for you, and it's tough for your students. I think we all need to acknowledge that, and we need to be aware of it, and we need to bring that into our teaching, that this has been a tough old time. And as teachers, we want to try and help our students get through it and get out of it. And I can't offer easy solutions, but I do believe very strongly that there are ways we can pull some positivity out of this. And in the book that I've just finished working on in New Close-Up, we have a little strand called Live Well, Study Well, because we really believe that it's important to focus on students' well-being, and that, as I said earlier, students do have to look after their well-being in order to study well, and we can help them do that. And that's the great thing about teaching English, because we can choose our subjects and cover all sorts of interesting things. So there is a way that we can continue to teach English, prepare our students for academic success, and focus on their overall well-being, focus on the whole students. So we can make a difference to our students' lives. So let me share some ideas with you now. I'm going to divide this talk into 3 sections. 3 ways to encourage positivity, 3 ways to develop our students' soft skills, and 3 ways to help our students deal with difficult situations. Let's go straight into positivity. 3 ways to encourage positivity. So I did a very unscientific survey when I was thinking about this, because I was interested to find out what it is that makes young people feel positive. My unscientific survey meant that I basically talked to my 2 daughters, who are aged 16 and 20, and then I asked them to go and ask their friends, so that it kind of spread out from there. So this is not a hugely international survey, but I think it is interesting. I also went on to all my friends on Facebook internationally and asked them to talk to their students, their teens, their kids, and just ask them, what makes you feel positive? That's what I wanted to know. What makes young people feel positive? And this was particularly during the last year and a half of difficult times. And these were the things they came up with, and I stuck them all into one of these word clouds, just to give you a kind of visual representation of what it is that makes young people feel positive. And the larger the words, the more often these things were mentioned. So you'll see that one of the top things that's mentioned here is connecting with friends. That's really important. Connecting with friends, also going outside, going on walks, exercise. You'll see pets turn up a lot there, cats, dogs, rabbits, reading, but fresh air, exercise, as I say, self-care, doing craft activities, painting, music. So you're getting a bit of a picture of the kind of things that make students feel really positive. And having asked about that, I thought, what are the ways that we can really build this into our teaching, so that we're not just sitting there teaching stuff out of books, which is really important too, but we're properly addressing the things that can help our students right now. And the activities that I'm going to suggest are activities that can be done if you are going back to teaching online, and let's all hope that we don't have to. And there are also things that you can use in the classroom. So I've tried to make them as practical as possible. So let's talk about staying connected. I think this is really, really important. And I was very interested to find out, talking to my daughter, who at the time was 15, very sociable girl, tons of friends at school. And about 2-3 months into lockdown, I noticed that she really was not chatting with her friends online. She wasn't WhatsApping them. She wasn't talking to them on Snapchat. She was just kind of getting on with her work and then, watching YouTube videos or TikTok or something. And I said to her, why are you not chatting to your friends more? I know you can't see them, but why aren't you communicating with them? And she said, because we've got nothing to talk about, because nothing is happening in our lives, which is very interesting and a little bit depressing. And I thought, okay, that's a very good point. When you're stuck indoors and you can't go outside and you can't mix with your friends and your horizons seem very narrowed, then we need to give our students reasons to talk to one another. So we need to really support them and help them. So how can we do that? So we can give them little tasks like this, whether they can do this in person or online, depends on the situation. Contact 3 friends or 3 family members and ask them to tell you an interesting fact about themselves. think of 3 adjectives to describe you. Tell you about a time they felt scared or excited or proud. Tell you what their last meal would be. So these are just some ideas. You can think of other ones. But the idea is that you give your students that task. They don't have to use English. They can use their first language to talk to their friends and their family members. But then, of course, they come back to the class and they report back. And that's when they're using their English. So it's a kind of hidden way of getting your students to make contact with their friends and family. So they think of it as a homework task, but actually it's also a way that you're helping them to look after their well-being and helping to support them. So that's just one way that you can get them to be positive, is to get them staying connected with their friends. Okay, that's idea number 1. Idea number 2, get outside, even if you're just sticking your head out of the window. So I know this from a personal point of view. I'm basically a very, very lazy person. But I do have 2 dogs and I have absolutely no choice whatsoever. I have to take my dogs out every single day. Otherwise they go bananas. So I do. And it doesn't matter how lazy I'm feeling and how bad the weather is. Within 5 minutes of getting outside, I feel better. I just do, because you're breathing the fresh air and you're moving away and you're interacting with nature. So it's a really, really positive thing to get outside in terms of mental health. How can you get your students to do that? Give them a little task to do. So you say to your students, right, go outside and, for example, take a picture for every colour in the rainbow. So this can work with your A1 students who are just beginning to learn colours. Say, right, I want you to take a picture of something for every colour in the rainbow, then bring it back to class or show it on the screen and get the other students to name the colours in the pictures. It's really simple, but it gets them going outside. Or take a picture for every letter in the alphabet. So you can divide up the class into groups and you can give them certain letters with the alphabet and get them to go outside and take pictures of things that correspond with those letters in the alphabet. And again, then they come back and it's a little quiz for their partners or for other people in the class to guess the words. And for your more advanced students, for your students at maybe B2 or C1, where they're dealing with idioms and phrases, you can pick out some colloquial phrases that you want them to focus on, like, for example, every cloud has a silver lining. And you can tell them to go outside and take a picture that represents this phrase. And in the very unlikely scenario that they don't have a phone that can take photographs, you could even ask them to make a drawing of something to represent it, but it's got to be something that they see outside. So it's just a very simple way of getting your students to get outside and do something rather than be stuck inside feeling a bit blue. Okay, so that was my second positive idea. We had staying connected and we had going outside, getting outside. The third one is creating something, going with the flow. So that whole idea of going with the flow was thought up by, I think it was an American-Hungarian psychologist called Mika Shinto or something. Gosh, I've forgotten his name and I should have written it down. But anyway, going with the flow basically means that when you're creatively inspired, you kind of lose sense of time. You get very involved in what you're doing, and that's a very positive experience. And it's something that you can do on your own, in your home, do something creative, and it makes you feel better. And we can work that into the English classroom. So, for example, set your students a writing task, but just make it a little bit weird and fun by putting some odd words in, like write a story which includes the words piano, tree, banana, and just, it's a little bit of a challenge. It's a little bit unusual. It's not quite the same as the normal ones. Or you could have write a story which ends with the words, and I never saw them again. So just something that's a little bit challenging. Or another thing, because a lot of students I've noticed, or a lot of young people, really got into baking. I don't know if it was the same in Italy, but certainly here in the UK, when lockdown started, like all the flour disappeared from the shelves and all the baking powder, because everyone suddenly decided they were going to become baking gurus. So if your students enjoy cooking, you could say, well, find a healthy recipe in English, which uses, for example, a cabbage, a pepper, and some cheese. Change some of the ingredients, make your own version, write a recipe, take a photograph, and explain why it's healthy. So there's tons of English practice in that. Loads of practice of the words for food, the words for giving instructions, words relating to health. But also you're getting them to eat healthily and think about food and doing something that's creative and fun and positive. Or just drawing. I'd get them to draw a picture of something you love and then write a few sentences to say why you love it. So it's just focusing on those activities that practice English but are also really positive. Okay, so that is the end of my first section. I'm kind of racing through this a bit because I'm very aware of the fact that it's the end of the day for you and I do not want to go over, and I do want to give a little bit of time for questions. So that was the end of my first section. My second section is about soft skills. So you all know what soft skills are. They are things like teamwork and resilience and persistence and grit, those kind of things. So, and you probably know, sometimes they're called 21st century skills, sometimes they're called non-cognitive skills, sometimes they are called social and emotional learning. They're increasingly understood life skills. Yes, thank you, Sophia. So they're increasingly understood and appreciated as being very, very important in education. They're very important to imbue our students with those skills. And these are the kind of skills that can't be replaced by machines. So it's really important that we work on those skills. And we can do that in the classroom. So I thought, let's give you a few little ideas. And the first one is all about teamwork, which of course is very important. Sorry, I just want to do something. Right, teamwork. Now I will admit of myself that I'm very bad at teamwork, and that's because I work all by myself in my little office at the end of the garden. I don't really have to deal with other people. So it's all a bit of a shock for me when I have to work with others. But it is a very important skill, and it's one you want to try and get your students to develop. And of course, you do that anyway, whenever you ask them to work in groups or even in pairs, they're working on those teamwork activities. So I just want to show you something from New Close-Up, from one of these pages that I talked about, which is the Live Well, Study Well strand. So this is one page at the end of every 2 units that focuses on these kind of soft skills and ways to develop positivity. And it's called Live Well, Study Well. And this one focuses on teamwork. So you can start by telling your students the different, show them a simple infographic like this, which brings out the different ways of working in a team, respecting other people, communicating ideas, listening, doing your share, being reliable. So they can look at an infographic like that and discuss it. And then you pick out a particular important skill from that. So in this one, this Mind Your Mind box, of which there is one box in every one of these Live Well, Study Well pages, we talk about having confidence in yourself, because one of the problems about working in a team is it can be difficult to do if you don't have confidence in yourself. It can be easy to sit back and let others take control, which is what I've said here. It's difficult to work in a team if you're quiet or not very confident. And you have to remember that everyone's important. Don't be afraid to share your ideas, and also listen to other people and encourage quieter people to speak up. And remember that a good team has lots of different skills. So find your strength and do things that you know you can do well. So having told the students that, having made them understand that a good team includes people who are shy and quiet, as well as people who are lively and louder, we then move on to some projects which will help them to develop these teamwork skills. So they can choose which project they want to do. The first one is a classic one that I'm sure you will all know very well. Can you not see my screen? Someone's just said that you're not sharing your screen. Can I just double check that you can see my screen? You can, yeah. Okay, good. All right, good. I'll carry on. Sorry to whoever it was who said that. I think that's probably a problem with your screen, Ines. Yeah, I think that might be your problem. Everyone else seems to be okay. All right, so sorry, going back to project 1, it's the classic desert island. I'm sure you've done it with your students. It's great fun, where you have to work together in a team and decide which of these possible pieces of equipment you will need on a desert island, and you have to rank them from most important to least important, and you have to all agree on the order. So it's a great way of practicing teamwork. And the second one is making a plan of action for a group in your community to try and raise some money. So 2 little projects where you can choose which one you want to do with your students, or your students can choose which one, but they're practicing their teamwork. So that's just how we do it in the book. Let's move on to another very important soft skill. And this one I'm just going to introduce with a very, very short video clip.
Hey, Mr. Grumpy Gills. When life gets you down, you know what you gotta do?
I don't want to know what you gotta do.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim, swim.
Dory, no singing.
Dory. I love to swim in.
Dory.
When you want to swim, you want
See,
to
I'm gonna get stuck now with that song. Now it's in my head.
Sorry.
Okay. So I kind of love that clip, because honestly, I thought that so many times during the darkest days of lockdown. It's just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep going, don't give up. And that skill, that soft skill of resilience is so important. It's so important to give your students that. They're going to need that in life. And it's one of the things that's been identified, it's sometimes referred to as grit, as one of the strongest reasons for students being successful and achieving things and getting through problems, is that having that resilience. So it's really important for us as teachers to try and develop that. So I just thought of some ways that we can try and help our students deal with it. And you can choose whether you want to get your students to work individually or whether you want to get them to work in groups. And I think that really depends on how well you know your students and how well you think they will cope with this, because this can be a little bit emotionally challenging for them. Because what you're going to do is you're going to work with the idea of a problem and how to deal with it. So if we start with working individually, you would ask your student individually to think of a problem that they have. It can be any problem. It can be a problem at school. It can be a problem at home, just a problem. Write it down, and then try and think of a list of small steps you can take to deal with it. So the idea is that you get your students to focus on breaking down big, insurmountable problems into small steps. And then you decide on a small reward for yourself for each step that you can take. For example, if I manage to do this thing, then I'm going to allow myself to listen to my favorite song, or I'm going to dance around the room for 5 minutes, or just something that's a small reward. And this way of breaking down a problem into smaller steps and rewarding yourself for each step that you take is a very positive way of encouraging your students to develop resilience. But you may feel, even if you ask your students to share those ideas anonymously with the class, they may find that too overwhelming to do. And it just may be, you may feel that that's a little bit too tricky, which is fine. And I completely understand that. And as I say, it depends very much on how well you know your class and how comfortable you are with doing that. So alternatively, you can do it in a much more kind of generic way. So you can ask your students to work in groups, and you can start off by brainstorming a list of general problems. What are the kind of things, what are the kind of problems that people in general have? And they might say, oh, bullying, or they might say that it's very difficult for them to do their work because they suffer from dyslexia, or, you know, any kind of problems that might come up with. So you ask your students then in groups to pick one of the problems that you've brainstormed, and then they do the same thing. They create a list of small steps and possible rewards, and then they can swap their problems and comment on each other's ideas. So you're still giving them the tools. You're giving them the tools that tell them how they can deal with problems and how they can be resilient, but they're not having to do it in such a personal way that may feel a little bit too confrontational to them. So that's my idea for resilience. The third soft skill, and this is one that you will be very, very familiar with because it's a 21st century skill, and that is critical thinking. Okay. So what do we mean by critical thinking? I often think that critical thinking is really all about asking the right questions. It's not so much about answering them, it's about asking the questions. And it's so important to develop critical thinking skills. I think we've all seen in the last sort of 18 months, you know, the misinformation and the fake news and the stuff that just kind of proliferates and goes around social media, and is very difficult for everyone to pick up on the right facts and the true facts and to distinguish what's useful from what's not useful or what's actually dangerous. So that's why our students need to develop those critical thinking skills. So first of all, I think you can get them to always have these questions in mind. So whenever you read an online news article, say to your students, think about these questions. Where does it come from? Who wrote it? What is it saying? How did it get this information? Why is it giving this information? And when was it published? So those are all really, really important questions for your students to ask every time they read something online or they hear a piece of news or a piece of information. They have to think about those things. Now, there are some games that your students can play. I've given you some links here. Also, BBC Bite Size is another one that I meant to write down there that does very good sort of fake news quizzes where you can read different items of news and then you have to guess whether it's fake news or if it's actually true. So it might be fun to try these out with your students, but I would advise you definitely to look at them first yourself because some of them won't be appropriate for your younger students, and the language level obviously will be at different levels. But it's a very useful thing for students to do, and that is to practice distinguishing fact from fiction, and that's a very good use of critical skills. Now, working for National Geographic Learning, writing for them, I'm very lucky because we have access to many beautiful photographs, and photographs are a fantastic way to promote critical thinking. So I'm going to show you a photo here. And I would like you to answer some questions. So I want you to use your critical thinking skills, please, to answer these questions. So first of all, looking at the photograph very carefully, where do you think it is? Can anyone guess where this might be? Brazil, Caribbean, Africa, Haiti, Indonesia, tropics. Okay, cool. So you are obviously using your critical thinking skills because there are things that you've looked at. So you've looked at the ethnicity of the children, and then maybe you've looked at the flowers, and maybe you've looked at the clothes that they're wearing, and all those things are going to inform where you think this picture may have been taken. Now, do you think the flamingo is a real flamingo or a fake flamingo? What do you think? Real or fake? Put your answers in the chat box. Real, real, fake, real. It looks real. Yeah. Okay. And last question before I tell you the answers. Why do you think children are carrying a flamingo? Why on earth could they be carrying a flamingo? And again, look at the clues that are there. It could be fake flowers as well. It's got a broken wing and leg. Right, someone said show and tell, science project, gift for the teacher. Okay, so good. So you have used your critical thinking skills because you've also obviously noticed that there's a title there, Back to School. There's the title of the unit, Life Lessons. And that all tells you that this is going to somehow link in with education. So I'll tell you the actual story. This is a real flamingo. This is called Flamingo Bob. He has a name. And this is in, someone said Caribbean, and you're right, this is on the Dutch Caribbean island of Curacao. So this flamingo flew into a hotel window in 2016, knocked himself out, and he was a very lucky flamingo because it so happened that there was a a vet called Odette Durst, who lives on the island, who runs a wildlife rehabilitation centre. And she looked after Flamingo Bob, and she's still looking after him. And she helped to rehabilitate him. And he was injured in such a way that he was never going to be able to live in the wild again. So he had to live in her wildlife centre. She also discovered that he'd been injured in the past due to plastic pollution in the oceans. And so she decided that he would make a great ambassador for ecological, environmental awareness. So what she does is she takes Flamingo Bob into classrooms in Curacao. She takes them, she visits schools, she tells the kids all about Flamingo Bob and all about how his life was put in danger by plastic in the oceans. And that really brings that subject alive for students. It makes it so real. And they're suddenly much, much more motivated to find out about the environment, to find out about how to clean the oceans, how to keep the beaches clean, all because of Flamingo Bob. So that's a nice story. And you can just use pictures like this to really get your students' critical skills working. And then you can see the questions that we have here. So Bob is a rescued flamingo whose owner uses him to help people think about nature and environment. How might a bird like this teach people to change their habits? Critical thinking. And what other animals do you think could be used in schools to teach children about life outside school? So that's another critical thinking task. Okay, I have got just 10 minutes left, and I can see that some people, unfortunately, are having to leave. So I'm going to whiz through this because I did promise you I'm not going to go over into the third section of my talk, which is how to deal with difficult situations and negative thoughts. And the first way is to take ownership. And this is very much linked with resilience. So the idea is that when you have huge problems, and since we were talking about the environment, let's talk about protecting the planet. That can often seem very overwhelming. Children, young people can be very overwhelmed by the whole climate crisis. Then you can just make it smaller. It's talking about small steps again. So protecting the planet starts with you. These are some things that you can do. Eat less meat, change the way you travel, use less plastic, become a volunteer. And then we move on to students finding ways that they can achieve change. Start with a small goal, make sure it's something you can really do, talk to a friend and share your goals, and try to stay positive. Don't give up if you have a bad day. And then, of course, we move on to the projects. So in this case, we're talking about the environment and achieving change and taking ownership. It's discuss how you can encourage your friends to change their habits, or make a poster that gives people tips for changing their habits to help the environment. So that's about taking ownership. Managing screen time. So screen time gets a bit of a bad press, doesn't it? And people are always moaning on about how teenagers spend too much time on their screens. But, you know, screens aren't all bad. There's so many things that we learned in the last 18 months, so many ways that students can learn online and through screens. And I just caught the Cambridge University people before me talking about some of the wonderful things that they offer. There are so many ways that students can make their own quizzes with Quizlet and Kahoot, share them with their classmates. You can use Padlet. It's a fantastic way of like having a shared classroom notice board where you can brainstorm ideas and vocabulary. And you can create word clouds like the one that I did showed you at the beginning for positivity. That's a great way to plan writing or review lexical sets or list strategies. But also, you then want to give your students things to do when they switch off their screens. So just some ideas. In the UK, in fact, I think internationally, there was a chap called Joe Wicks, who was he's a fitness instructor. He went quite viral. He did all his workout routines. I attempted to do them with him. But you can get your students to do something like that. Say, oh, look, find a workout routine you really like online, then create your own. Switch off your screen, create your own. Use English to explain what you're doing, and then film it with English instructions. It's a really fun thing to do. That it just gives them time away from the screen. Or something that's quite nice is imagine you're having the best holiday of your life and write and send a postcard to your teacher, but actually write a real postcard and put a stamp on it, which is something incredibly that, you know, my younger daughter doesn't even know where a stamp goes on an envelope because she has no experience of writing real letters and postcards. So actually to get your students to write a postcard and send it either to their teacher or to their school or to a friend is just a fun way of getting students to switch off their screens. Or, for example, draw a diagram of your dream house and label it. So just some of the ways that you can manage students' screen time positively by using screens in a good way and also by turning away from the screens. All right, and finally, very last idea, find your happy place. This is a meditation idea. This is something I use a lot when I find myself feeling a bit overwhelmed and like too many thoughts going through my head. I find my happy place. And the great thing about finding your happy place is that it's also really good practice for English. So you ask your students to think of a place that they can visit whenever they feel anxious or sad. It's their ideal place. It can be a real place. It can be a made-up place. It could be the beach. It could be the mountains. It could be the city. It's a place that always makes them feel happy. And then you ask your students to really focus on the details and in English describe, how did you get there? What can you see? Get them to think about their senses. Like, what can you touch? What can you smell? What can you hear? Are you alone or with other people? So all these things that they're doing, they're using their English, they're using loads and loads of descriptive words, but they're also creating a safe place that will always be a safe place because it's inside their head. And then you've given them a great gift, this happy place that they can always go to. And honestly, it really does work. It just helps to calm you down and slow you down and just sort of stop all those negative thoughts. Okay, so I have raced through, and I'm sorry this has been so quick. I've had my eye on the time, and it is also a way to stop a panic attack. Thank you, Joanne. Yes, it is. Just very quickly go over the ideas that I came up with today. Encouraging positivity, get your students to stay connected with friends and family, get them to get outside, get them to do something creative, whether that's drawing a picture or writing a recipe or writing a story. Develop their soft skills, get them working on their teamwork, get them thinking about resilience, how to manage their anxiety, break things down into small steps, and work on their critical thinking skills. And finally, deal with difficult situations, get them to take ownership of problems that they feel are too big, get them to manage their screen time, and get them to find their happy place. So to summarize, why do we want to teach the whole student? If you remember at the beginning of this talk, I mentioned that the vast majority of teachers, when they asked, they said they wanted to become a teacher because they wanted to make a difference to their students' lives. And I think when we focus on the whole student, we really can make a difference despite all the pressures and problems, because when students live well, they study well, because emotionally stable, happy, positive students learn better. And when we prepare students for life, we prepare students for success, both inside and outside the classroom. So we can make a difference to our students' lives. Thank you so much for taking part. Thank you for all your comments, and I'm very happy to answer any questions that you may have.